So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first and keynote speaker, who will be well known to many of you. It's a huge pleasure to introduce Baroness Sheila Hollins, who is a long time fervent and passionate campaigner for the rights of people with learning disabilities, who's going to be talking to us about the situation now and how people are surviving through story. Baroness Sheila Hollins, over to you.
Hello, and it's lovely to be here and to see so many friends on the call today, and to catch up with you, Nicola, after a long time. So I used to be a psychiatrist, and I now sit in the House of Lords, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about story. I'm also a storyteller myself, and I'm mother of Nigel, who just might be listening, if he's been able to get in on his iPad. Well, let's have the first slide. Next slide. None of us had heard of coronavirus, but we all know what it looks like now, don't we? And it was completely new. The idea that we were going to have a pandemic with a new virus took everybody by surprise. And the website that's being launched today is going to be basically helping to share some stories of what it's been like for people with learning disabilities. Let's have the next slide. The thing is, it's been hard for everybody to understand. I was in Parliament when it was first being talked about, and I was amazed how slow the government was to respond. They seemed not to really understand that this was really, really going to affect us, that we were going to be in the same position as Italy and Spain, and of course China. We were hearing stories from those countries, and yet we seemed to be paralysed, not to be able to do anything, not to be able to act. But I was more surprised by the slow way in which government and policymakers began to understand the needs of people with learning disabilities. Now, I'm in a unique position. In the House of Lords, I can ask questions, and I have asked lots of questions about people with learning disabilities, trying to raise awareness, written questions and spoken questions. And it's been so disheartening because the answers have not really helped. There hasn't been a full understanding. We have changed some things. To begin with, there was the idea that anybody who was considered frail and was admitted to hospital and met certain frailty scores might not be prioritised for the most intensive treatment. And to begin with, it seemed as if people with learning disabilities might be included in that. We did get that changed. What we know is, unfortunately, that we know that older people are more at risk of dying. But perhaps what people don't realise is that people with learning disabilities are also at greater risk of dying from the virus if they get it. And there have been more deaths this year of people with learning disabilities than in the equivalent time period last year. Let's have the next slide. So it seemed really, really important that one, people's real needs were understood, but two, that people themselves understood and their families understood. Stories are one of the best ways to help us to raise awareness about people's lives. And you know, what the politicians were doing was thinking about older people. They were thinking about care homes, but they weren't thinking about people who live more independently, who perhaps had support coming in during the day, who were going out and about and attending activities which was suddenly going to be stopped. Let's move on to the next slide. So this is the first place where people's stories are going to be collected together. And they're about good stories and not so good stories, and about how people tell stories. And through those stories, hopefully, we will learn to support people better. There's a lot of people talk about getting back to normal. I'm not sure there will be or is something called normal that we're going to get back to. I think it's going to be a new normal. We're going to have changed because of the pandemic. And the storytelling will help us to adjust our ideas about what to expect, what to look forward to, what to hope for in the future. Let's have the next slide. Well, in my storytelling role, I have been creating stories with people with learning disabilities for many years, more than 60 stories now, which have been published. And what we found at Beyond Words was that people weren't talking to individuals with learning disabilities, that people's routines and friendships had been disrupted. My son, Nigel, said, when I said, I'm afraid you can't just go out and about as usual, you can't go to your normal activities. He said to me, quite rightly, you can't tell me what to do. Okay? He said, you can't tell me what to do. So we created a little story called Good Days and Bad Days during lockdown, trying to think about, well, what would a new routine look like? What would a day look like? What would a bad day look like? It's a story just in pictures, which was drawn from discussions we had with a few people whose lives have been disrupted. The next thing that happened was that my son actually got the virus. He became ill with coronavirus. And trying to understand that and understanding how to look after himself and how we could help him to look after himself was really, really key. So we created a story based on his experience, which we call Beating the Virus. But the characters in the story are characters from a previous story that we created with Access All Areas, which had come about from some drama that we'd done, some storytelling through drama. And we brought some of those characters into this story to be able to share what's it like getting the virus and what do you have to do to keep safe. And we added having a test for the coronavirus and so on. And I think altogether we've created 10 stories based on people's experiences. But we wanted people to understand, we wanted to reduce people's anxiety and to keep safe. And they're free. We made all of them free from our website. Let's have the next slide. And then another thing we realised was that people were worried about death and dying. They were listening to the television, they were hearing about people dying. They might have known somebody who was dying. Many people, perhaps having been in a residential setting or in supported living, were now back home with mum and dad. Perhaps they were worried about how well mum and dad would be. So we wanted to share the different ways in which you can talk about death and dying. Can we move on to the next slide? We're also aware that, getting back to normal, whatever normal is, there are going to be, you can't just go back to normal because there have been loss and change and anxiety and all kinds of things which get in the way of being able to have the confidence to go out and about again. For my son, he's needed to learn to wear a mask, to use hand gel, to understand the social distancing if he goes to the supermarket, to learn how to use a contactless card rather than cash, all of those kinds of things.
Introduced to me because I hate people like it.
And for children, then it's kind of going back to school is really quite something. Let's move on to the next slide. With Generate, some of our books have been used to create a resource to help people talk about when someone is ill or dies from coronavirus. These are topics that many of us are not comfortable talking about. And to do this online, Beyond Words has been creating online book clubs instead of book clubs in libraries where people can meet together once a week or once a fortnight and to read a story together and to create their own story. Next slide. And also we created some leaflets to help supporters and carers to know how to keep people through the pandemic and how to talk about difficult subjects like death and dying and to help people talk about their own anxieties and fears and experiences. And I think that's my last slide. So there you go, a little quick run through of some of the things.
Wow, Sheila, that is absolutely amazing. It's just wonderful to hear how very quickly Books Beyond Words were able to respond and how the kind of links that are being made. And I think that, I think what's very interesting is the kind of grounding between the social stories which kind of explain everybody's experiences and then how you make links with your own personal experience. So thank you so much for that. I'm sure people are going to have questions for you. But we're going to move on now